This is Access Tech Live.
On Access Tech Live, Marco Flalo with Sean Priest sitting in for Stephen Scott this week, talking all about Apple's media events. Sean, this was the first time in a couple months we've seen an announcement from Apple. The last ones were press releases, but it's the first time in almost 2 years that we're seeing new iPads, and they started the event with the iPad Air, probably I think because it's the most, I guess, entry-level iPad that kind of fits every single person. That being said, do you even use an iPad?
What a great opener. You know what? No. And we've talked about this before, me and Stephen on the show. Are tablets actually, are they dead now? I'm going to go brutal. Are they dead when it comes to people who don't care about the screen? I think tablets, iPads are particularly great for low vision, content consumption. But if you're just using a screen reader and you don't care about the screen, what else do they offer, compared to the iPhone? I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, there's no denying these are gorgeous bits of kit.
Yeah, listen, I think that we might see a little bit more in terms of the accessibility side of things when we hear about software at their Worldwide Developers Conference. It's about a month away, right? And this is what I think Apple's doing with this entire iPad kind of reshift, is they're trying to kind of explain what the lineup is and give everybody a place where they fit in the lineup. I'm on the fence in terms of thinking whether an iPad for me is really even a useful piece of kit, because your MacBooks are super powerful. Even the MacBook Air is super powerful, and they're pretty thin and portable. So do you even really need a tablet in your lineup? Now, that being said, I know there's a use case here. Listen, I know there's media consumption. I know my kids, it's a great tool for schools and, replacement for Chromebooks in education. But the thing that attracted me the most about this particular event, and what kind of intrigued me, and I think it's the hook, right? They always throw out some kind of hook to get you in there. And it's the fact that even though we heard rumors last week, that they threw the M4 chip into the new iPad Pros. And it's interesting, and the reason is so they can obviously get ahead of AI and the requirements they're going to need, but they skipped a whole generation there, and I don't think we're going to see many products with M3 anymore as everybody kind of jumps to M4.
Yeah, again, it's slightly the rollout of the Apple Silicon is a bit strange, isn't it? They seem to be pumping these things out and throwing them into devices. But I think you're absolutely right. I think the main thing here is the power in these tablets is immense. I mean, we can't make any use of it right now at all. Even the previous, was it the M2 the Pro had before? I mean, we were barely pushing that. So now this has got an M4 chip in it, and this must be to do with AI. So whatever's coming in the next OS across the board, on Mac, on iPad, on iPhone, whatever Apple have got planned for their AI, it needs this amount of power, which is exciting in itself,
Absolutely. And I think that, this was actually the first keynote that we've heard Apple use the words AI. I should go back and count it and do some kind of video on that, because it was easily a dozen times, whereas you can tell they've almost intentionally left it out of previous keynotes. They used to use, machine learning was the word they went with. Is there something that you can see, or something that you would look forward to artificial intelligence wise from Apple that maybe somebody else isn't doing? It's always hard to, I find it's hard to envision something new beyond what's there, because everything that's out there now is already like, oh my God, I'm still trying to figure this out. But can Apple really reinvent something here other than improving Siri?
Isn't that enough? I mean, don't you think we're still in that honeymoon period with AI at the minute, right? You said, oh my God, and we're still doing that with all this AI services, no matter what it is. Oh my God, it understands what I'm trying to tell it. Oh my God, it understands the context. And we're still kind of surprised by that and impressed by that, as we were with the smart speakers when they first come out. And now when you look back, or when you use a smart speaker today, it's all a bit, yeah, okay, it's not bad.
Antiquated?
But yeah, exactly. And I feel like we're so impressed with the way it understands, the language model that it's got is fantastic. But still, I want to be able to say, hey, grab this email and do this and grab that, and, a sequence of commands, and it to understand it and be able to do that. Everything I've used so far, Copilot, for example, on Windows, I mean, it's got great potential, but so far it's just not integrated into the system. Now, if I can do that on my iPhone, just give a command to do multiple tasks, That's all I want it to do. And so far, I think, you know what, it understands me. We've got that absolutely covered, and it can even understand, you know, objects in images and things like that. That's absolutely covered. All we need to do now is sort of set it loose on our systems, but maybe that's where the danger lies, and maybe that's why we're taking our time. But I think Apple's going to do that.
Well, we saw a couple integrations because they did announce a couple pieces of new software. They announced Final Cut Pro for the iPad version 2. That's confusing in itself. The interesting thing about that was there was a lot of taking advantage of that M4 chip, things like removing backgrounds, audio enhancements happening in mere seconds. One of the interesting things I found, this isn't even AI related, was they actually added a Final Cut camera app that allows you to use up to 4 separate iPhones to get a multi-view production recorded onto an iPad. That's pretty cool. Like, I can see this being used by podcasters worldwide who don't want to go out and spend, you know, $2,500 on cameras. And then they made some software updates to Logic, which is their, I call it an audio suite, but it's more of a music creation software. And this is where, again, AI shined as well. And that's the pattern I'm seeing now, is that, as you said, we're still in the infancy of what AI can do. Seeing it integrated into software in a seamless way seems like kind of the meta approach, where let's throw it in a pair of glasses, make it passive and make it easy to use. And as time goes by, we're going to include more and more complex features. Do you think that's the case?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're waiting for the next level. As I said, I still feel we're in the honeymoon period with it, but I think in the next level we're going to see it sort of almost set free, let loose upon your system. Now that's going to be scary, but Apple have got the advantage of being on device. You know, everything's going to stay on your device as much as it can. And yes, exactly. Well, I think that gives it more power. You know, it can, your emails, for example, don't have to be sent out to some server somewhere. It can do it on device. And again, we're back to the power needed. And if we're talking about the iPads in particular, also, I think it's interesting. Are we going to see a move away from iPad OS and a move towards Mac OS? I mean, are we trying to
I think we're probably a couple of years away from that, where we'll see the iPad eventually replace the MacBook Air. I think it's inevitable. Like, there's no hiding the fact that, you know, they've got these major processors in there, and they're not going much higher on processors on the MacBook Air. Talk about accessibility for a second, because as you said, an iPad, you know, if you're not using the screen, what's the benefit? But what about the software side of things? What, other than, you know, context, like you were talking about, where you can give it a string of things and let it work, do you see any accessibility impacts on the way in which, how would AI make your life easier using a device like that with just your voice? It's got to be more than just context.
Yeah, but I think it's a case of making it easier and making just using technology simpler for everyone with a disability or not. You know, of course, there's going to be issues about, you know, voice control for people with some sort of speech impediment or speech problems or no speech at all. But, you know, being able to type your input, whatever it is, the important is understanding the context. And with that understanding the context, though, is that I don't have to dive into settings to find something. I don't have to dive through file folder or Finder or whatever it may be to get something done. It's all about making productivity or even content consumption easier. And the way to do that is to lever the power of AI to find...
Really creating shortcuts, right? Creating shortcuts to the things you might do on a daily basis to make your life easier. Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. I'm actually looking forward to WWDC. Again, that's their Worldwide Developers Conference. It's happening just at the beginning of June. I'm curious to see where AI fits into the picture across the board, but I'm really curious to see how it affects developers. Because I can imagine if you could open a piece of software you've never used before, like Xcode, which is what they design apps in and programs, and being able to say, design me a framework for an iPhone app that does XYZ, and it just does 90% of the heavy lifting for you. And being able to code without having to actually learn how to code, and being able to use your voice and give it instruction or type in instructions, that seems almost game-changing to me. And the opportunities that could give people who want to go down that road but had that block of not being able to know where to find a developer or how to develop themselves or spend the money could disappear.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, everyone's got a novel in them, right? But we all know everyone's got an app in them. Everyone's got an idea for an app. The possibility to, you know, without any coding knowledge, to, as you say, get the 90% of the work done for you, and more importantly for me, if you could make sure that that code is also accessible through AI tests on accessibility, it could absolutely change everything. Of course, there's still going to be lots of work for real qualified coders to do, but the ability just to play around with ideas using AI with no coding experience, it's going to be massive.
Yeah, it's going to be quite impressive. There's a conversation that started online that I followed after the iPad event, which was a suggestion that we should be pushing these big companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft to force app developers to include accessibility by design. It raised a bunch of conversation. I think it's a conversation worth having. Do you think that's something that should be done or can even be policed?
It's an interesting question. It's one that we've had in our community for the longest time. I think the NFB even came out trying to, with a guideline, trying to get Apple to say that all apps in the App Store should be accessible, and if they're not accessible, then they don't make the cut and they don't get entry. So I can actually, I think it's a great idea, but it does come down to moderation, to that policing. How do you police all that? I mean, who's to say what app can be made accessible? I mean, if there's some sort of graphic imaging app, if there's a painting app, now I'm not saying it can't be made accessible. I'm not smart enough to say that definitely can never be accessible, because I'm always surprised by what can be made accessible. But yeah, I can see it being a really difficult thing to police.
Well, one thing I think we're sure to find out is some pretty cool tools and how AI is going to make just creating stuff in general a lot easier. And it's something that we're going to talk about with our next couple guests, Sean, because coming up, being an influencer, is it all that's chalked up to be? I think we have some great tools out there to make anyone have that road to success online. But how easy is it? So we're going to dive right into that with a woman who says, and I quote, "I have Down syndrome, and it's the least interesting thing about me." Madison Tevlin joins us next here on Access Tech Live.
There's more Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.